Hi class, let us now start our topic on web design. At the end of this chapter, you are expected to know again some surface idea about HTML and then CSS and how to develop web pages using a text editor. For this part of the chapter, we will cover HTML and CSS. JavaScript will be covered in the second part of this chapter. Let us go through a few definitions of terms. World Wide Web or WWW is the international connection of networks, also called the Internet. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, is the standard for defining web pages. Web page is a file that is written in HTML and it can be rendered by browser. When it is rendered by a browser, we call it a web page. A website, on the other hand, is the portal or host that houses the web page, which means in the portal, you can list the folder content and you will see the HTML files in it. Next, more about hypertext markup language. It is the standard programming language that is specialized for defining web pages. That's why we call it markup language. It is a specialized programming language. Current version is 5. Web developers or the user of HTML adopt an approach we call MVC or Model View Control to design web pages. In MVC approach, HTML plays the role as model because it gives the content of what to be displayed in a web page. And due to MVC approach also, some HTML tags have been deprecated and some are added in HTML5. HTML is merely a text file. You can edit it directly using text editor. Browsers are the translator or compilers of the HTML program, but the rule of HTML is not imposed so strictly by the browsers, which means browsers can still correctly display or render the content of poorly defined HTML. The reason is because if the browsers are so picky, they will not be very popular. The current version of HTML5 is moving toward more strict rule of the original language, which is XHTML, but this is still in transition period. The core of HTML are tags, and basically we can also say that HTML is the language of tags. Part of the rules imposed by XHTML is that every content must be part of a tag. We put a footnote here telling that we are not going to follow these rules strictly in our exercise. However, there is XHTML part of HTML that is actually not following the proper HTML tag standard. For example, the whole thing here is supposedly new standard of HTML, but in HTML5 we are required to put doc type that is not actually part of HTML, but it is part of XHTML. So we were saying that text is the core of HTML. So what are the tags? The text must have this format. It must have the opening tag and the closing tag. The syntax for opening and closing is like this. The opening text must have the less than marker followed by the tag name and then closed by greater than operator or greater than marker. And the closing tag is similar except that there must be a slash between the less than symbol and the tag name. So that is the anatomy of tag. Tags can be nested but not overlap. This is similar to any rule in any programming language. For example, in C, C++, the curly bracket cannot be overlapped, but they can be nested. Many tags can have text content or just content. We will have the opening tag and then followed by closing tag. In between is what we call the content of the tag. If the tag doesn't need any text content, some tags are defined not to have any content. It can be simplified as follows. For example, the line break tag, which is BR, like this. We cannot put anything in between the opening and the closing tag. So we can combine them to become just one tag like this. There's no opening, closing. The opening and closing basically merge together. So what is the simplest HTML file? This is it. We need to have the HTML tag opening and closing, and then inside HTML must be nested two more pair of tags, which is the head followed by body, and there are many more in between head and body. So this is the skeletal content of HTML file. The way we structure or format the HTML text is not important, which means you can arrange these lines. You can indent, you can put anywhere you want, but the rendering is the same. Why? Because any white space used for formatting will be collapsed into just one single white space. And what is white space? White space are spacebar, tabs, and line breaks. That is enter or return key. So just now we say text can have content. Whatever text that we put in between opening tag and closing tag. Now we are telling you that text also can have attribute. Besides content, that is the text between opening and closing tags, text can also be modified with attribute values. The syntax, we just now have the opening tag and then the closing tag. The opening tag can be extended to have attribute. We need to know the name of the attribute and then we give the value. The value must always be string. So this is attribute. It has name and value. For example, there is one tag we call image tag img. It needs the source attribute or src attribute to be given value of the file that to be displayed as that image. And you see here, image tag doesn't have text content, so it is immediately closed using a slash and greater than symbol within the opening tag itself. When we are talking about attributes of the text, some of the attributes are references to resources, either in the internet or in our local hard disk. So we need a way to specify these resources. which is done using URL, stands for Uniform Resource Locator. URL are different depending on the type of resources that we want to access. Either it is on internet, we call it HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or FTP, File Transfer Protocol, email, or file. For our class, since we are dealing with the design of web page, not really on the engineering data communication aspect of it, we will cover only HTTP. The syntax of URL in HTTP is first start with HTTP://. For browser, this part starting from H until the slash here normally can be omitted, but it's good if we specify them, because sometimes we need to specify HTTPS. So this is the syntax. Start with HTTP:// and then followed by subdomain dot primary domain dot tld port number subfolder if you want to specify where the file in the folder directory until you reach the file name with the extension and then the anchor. Anchor is a location we put in a specific web page. What is a subdomain? Subdomain is the domain created within the primary domain. The default subdomain is www. The owner of the primary domain can create other subdomain besides www. Primary domain is a set of administrative ownership that can control that domain, or in simple word, the owner of the domain. TLD is the part that normally start with dot, for example, .net, .com, .com.my, etc. This is the top level domain, or we can say the type of domain. After that, subfolders can follow. Normally, we organize our files in the server in subfolders. So if we want to refer to a specific file, we need to use subfolder. And then the anchor started with a hash is a specific location in a web page, which means we can scroll the page to the point where we want our visitor to see. Just like file folder specification, URL can be specified as absolute location or relative location, because we can go up and down in the folder structure using ... which means going up one parent directory. Syntax of some common tags. Image is tag img, and the attribute source or src is compulsory, otherwise the browser won't be able to tell what image to display. So you need to give the value of the file name to the attribute src. And image tag does not have content, so we can collapse the opening and closing tag together. So it looks like this. There is no opening or closing tag. Hyperlink, it is a tag. You also need to tell where the link is going to, and the value is given to the attribute of href. You can display any text in between the opening tag and closing tag. You can even put the URL here, but the URL that is going to take effect when user click the link is the URL that's given in href. What I mean here is that if you put amazon.com in href, but you display something else, maybe facebook.com, even though the user click on the text facebook.com, but it will go to amazon.com because that is the value of href. We can also create table using HTML tag. This is the minimal table. You need, of course, table tag, and the table will be defined row by row. So tr is table row. You define the row and then you define the cell. Td is table data, or actually referring to the content of the cell. So we have opening of row, closing of row, and inside there are a few cells, opening of cell, td, and closing of cell. This is a really short list of important text. You can always Google this from W3 School. So P is paragraph. This is comment. You can put comment in your HTML file using this tag, less than followed by exclamation mark and then dash dash, and then you put comment, and then the closing of the opening tag is dash dash greater than. There is no closing tag because comment is not a tag per se. And then this is image, table, link. Strong is to make it bold, but you can also use tag B to make it bold, but it's actually not recommended, perhaps already deprecated. EM is emphasize. This one is to replace italic or tag I. This is break, this is horizontal row, and so on. Two more important one is the div and span. Div is the generic tag that is rendered as block like a table, and span is the content where it is rendered like text in paragraph. So if you have some kind of web content that you want to render, but it doesn't match to any existing HTML tag in the standard, you can use div or span. Use div if you want the element to be displayed like table or image, or you can use span if the content will be displayed like a text in paragraph. And there are a few tags that is deprecated and new in HTML5. As I said just now, B, you still can use tag B to make text to become bold, I to become italic, but it is not recommended now because it is deprecated. We actually need to use CSS for this. And new tags are video, SVG, MaxML, button, canvas, etc. Because HTML itself is a programming language, it has its own interpretation of certain symbol. So what if we want to use that symbol as itself? So this kind of symbol is what we call the hard to type characters. In other programming language like C, C++, we call this as escape sequence. In HTML, we call it entity. The syntax for entity is starting with ampersand and then the entity name and then end with semicolon. Or if we want to use the 4-digit hexadecimal Unicode for the entity or for the symbol, we can use that. And the syntax is ampersand, hash, x, and the 4-digit hex code end with semicolon. So example of entity are the character less than or greater than. We cannot simply put less than in the HTML content because if we put less than or greater than, it will make the browser to think that this is a tag. So what if we actually want to put these two symbols in our content? We need to use entity. So the entity code for less than is ampersand LT semicolon. It follows the syntax. And greater than is ampersand GT semicolon. It follows the same entity syntax. And now there's another problem. We use ampersand as the code for entity. So how do we put the ampersand itself? So there's another entity. It is ampersand AMP semicolon. This one will give an ampersand. But however, most browsers are smart enough to automatically convert a standalone ampersand to become the entity. So oftentimes nowadays we don't have to use this entity for ampersand. Just now we were talking about the Unicode that can be used in entity. What is Unicode? Unicode is the standardization of all characters that have ever been used in this world. You can find Unicode from this URL. It is governed by a consortium we call Unicode Consortium. They will update or add new characters as we go and document it. Example, Arabic characters, Hebrew characters, and even some Southeast Asian characters have already been encoded in Unicode. Some are non-language characters like box drawing characters and chemistry characters also encoded in Unicode. Entity can be added in HTML anywhere content can be put. Many of entity have their own names. You can go to this wiki entry. You can see example of them. This is the page. So this page is also explaining the syntax of the entity, and this is the name of the entity that we can use. For example, just now ampersand AMP semicolon apostrophe is ampersand appos and then semicolon. This is a caret character or head. We can use ampersand head semicolon. Copyright is copy ampersand copy semicolon. You will get the sign for copyright sign. Degree symbol is ampersand DEG semicolon, and so on. You can browse from this long list in this wiki entry. Or if you cannot find the name for the symbol that you want to use, but you know the Unicode value of it, you can use Unicode value to display as entity. For example, if you want to put the Greek character of lambda and division sign, you can use this entity ampersand hash x03bb semicolon and ampersand hash x00f7 semicolon respectively. Where do we find this value? We just Google from unicode.org.